The lawyer's office was silent, except for the occasional rustle of paper and the ticking of a wall clock. I sat in a leather chair, my fingers tightly gripping the armrests, as if the chair itself might somehow keep me grounded. My siblings flanked me, Brandon, Ashley, and Marcus, all impeccably dressed in their high-end outfits, clearly ready to enjoy the moment. It was all so formal, so expensive. I felt out of place, in my simple blouse and skirt, my shoes a little worn at the edges. The lawyer, a stiff man in his 60s named Mr. Parsons, cleared his throat and began reading the will in his usual monotone voice. "To my children, Brandon, Ashley, Marcus, and Evelyn," he said, pausing dramatically, looking up over his glasses. The weight of that one word, Evelyn, hit me hard. I had always been the outsider in this family, the one who didn't quite fit, and somehow, hearing him say my name like that made me feel more like a stranger than ever. As he continued, I couldn't help but notice the sharp glances from my siblings. They were all so eager. Each of them sat on the edge of their seats, barely able to contain their excitement. I knew they were already envisioning what they would do with their inheritances, the houses, the cars, the investments, and then, when it came time for me, it felt like the whole room held its breath. "Evelyn," Mr. Parsons said, and I straightened in my seat. I wasn't sure if he was looking at me or just reading from his papers, but I felt like I was under a spotlight. "You have been left a key." A key. I could feel the blood drain from my face as he slid a small, rusty object across the table, attached to a little tag that read Box 447. There was a pause, a moment where everyone looked at me, eyes wide with curiosity, but more with judgment. They were already laughing at me in their heads. I could see it in the smug smiles on their faces. "Is that it?" Ashley asked, her voice dripping with condescension. "A key? Wow, that's special." Brandon chuckled under his breath. "Maybe it's a key to a storage unit, or, maybe a box of old art supplies. Since you never really had any financial success with that art degree." I stayed silent, gripping the key tightly in my palm. I wasn't going to dignify their mockery with a response. I wasn't going to let them see me break. Not here, not now. "Maybe it's some kind of hidden treasure," Marcus chimed in, clearly trying to stay on the good side of the family. He was always the peacekeeper, always making jokes to avoid conflict. But even his words felt empty. I couldn't even look at them. I just stared down at the key, letting it sink in. I was the one who got the nothing inheritance, the one who had never lived up to their expectations. I knew what they were thinking, what they always thought. Evelyn, the artsy one. Evelyn, the one who couldn't keep a job, who never managed to make anything of herself. I wasn't their problem anymore, not their responsibility. Mr. Parsons cleared his throat again. "I trust that you will all respect your father's wishes," he said, his voice a little sterner now. I barely heard him. I didn't care about the other parts of the will. It didn't matter. The wealth, the properties, they were never mine to begin with. It was all for them, all for the ones who played the game the way they were supposed to. And me? I was just the odd one out. The meeting ended quickly after that, the lawyer gathering his papers as the rest of my family made their way out, their voices light with laughter, discussing their shares, their plans. No one even looked back at me. I didn't expect them to. I slid the key into my pocket, my hand shaking. What was this even about? What was it supposed to mean? All I knew for sure was that this wasn't about money. This was about something else, something I didn't understand, but I would find out. I would. When I stood up to leave, I saw Brandon glance back at me, his eyes gleaming with that smug, triumphant look he always wore. "Don't worry, Evelyn," he said, half laughing. "I'm sure it'll be a real treasure hunt." I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. I walked out of that office with the key still in my pocket, feeling like I had just stepped into a new chapter of my life, a chapter where my inheritance wasn't just about money. It was about something I had yet to figure out, and I would. The funeral was everything I had expected it to be, lavish, expensive, and oddly impersonal. The room was filled with grand floral arrangements, silver trays of finger foods, and guests who seemed to be more concerned about appearances than the reason we were all gathered. My siblings, of course, were right in their element. Brandon stood at the front, delivering a speech about our father's legacy, his voice deep and rehearsed, His expensive watch gleamed in the light as he gestured with his hands, as if the jewelry itself added weight to his words. "Dad built something incredible," he said, the pride in his voice unmistakable, and he passed that on to us. His words were supposed to sound humble, but the underlying arrogance was hard to miss. Ashley, sitting to the side, dabbed at her eyes with a designer handkerchief, carefully chosen for the occasion, of course. She made sure to catch everyone's eye, as if to say, "I'm so upset, but I'm still doing this with style." She sniffed dramatically, drawing a few sympathetic looks from the crowd. But the moment her eyes met mine across the room, she gave me that familiar, pitying glance. My inheritance, after all, wasn't part of this scene. While they all had new cars, real estate, and money to spend, I was stuck with a rusty key. It was almost comical how they ignored me, pretending to care about my father's passing, yet clearly more interested in showcasing their wealth. I sat at the back, my hands folded neatly in my lap, the key burning a hole in my pocket. No one had spoken directly to me yet, except for the faint whispers that floated my way as I entered, the thinly veiled questions about why I had been left with so little. "Aren't you sad, with how much you did for him?" one relative had said to me earlier, her voice dripping with false sympathy. I hadn't answered. What could I say? Sad wasn't the word for it. Confused, maybe. Angry, certainly. But there was nothing to gain from talking to someone who only saw me as a walking ATM. I turned my gaze away, not wanting to get pulled into another round of hollow sympathies. Instead, I focused on the key. Box 447. What did it mean? What was in that box that had my father leaving me so much more than money? I wasn't going to figure it out here, not in this room full of strangers pretending to care. The ceremony carried on with hollow speeches and more fake tears, each moment slipping by with the weight of the world pushing down on me. No one seemed to notice how quiet I was, how unlike my siblings I was in that moment. But I didn't care. I knew what mattered, and it wasn't this charade. As Brandon wrapped up his speech and sat back down with a flourish, Ashley turned her attention back to me. Her lips curved upward, but it was clear from the way she glanced at my pocket that she was wondering, too, what the hell that key was about. She wanted to ask, but her pride wouldn't let her. When the funeral finally ended, the crowd dispersed into small groups, chatting and congratulating each other on the ceremony, as if this was some kind of social event instead of a solemn goodbye. I stood up, still clutching the key in my hand, my mind racing. My siblings were already heading toward the exit, eager to make their rounds, no doubt preparing to flaunt their wealth to anyone who would listen. I didn't join them. I stayed behind for a while, sitting alone. There was a part of me that wanted to scream, to make them understand how hollow their lives had become, how they thought money and success defined everything, but I didn't. I wasn't like them. I left the funeral not with a sense of loss, but with the feeling that something larger was at play, something much more important than the money they had inherited. And I would find out what it was. When I left, no one noticed me slip out, the weight of the key still heavy in my pocket. The doors of First National Bank opened with a gentle whoosh, the cool, sterile air inside immediately contrasting with the heat outside. I stood for a moment, letting my eyes adjust to the dim, marble-columned interior. The bank had always struck me as one of those places that stood still in time, old-fashioned, dignified, with an air of permanence that seemed to mock the modern world. But today, all I could focus on was the key in my pocket. The key my father had left me. I walked up to the counter where a short, silver-haired woman with kind eyes stood. Mrs. Chen, her name tag read. She smiled at me as I approached, recognizing me instantly. The bank had been around long enough that I'd come in with my father many times when I was younger, but I never imagined I'd return like this. "Miss Evelyn," she said warmly, "I've been expecting you. Your father left specific instructions about the contents of safety deposit box 447. Only you are authorized to open it." I nodded, trying to keep my face composed despite the knot tightening in my chest. "I understand. I'm here to open it now." "Right this way," she said, leading me down a quiet hallway lined with rows of vaults, each one numbered meticulously. The dull clink of metal against metal echoed in the background, and the weight of the key in my pocket felt heavier with every step I took. We reached a small, closed-off room where a single heavy door stood. Mrs. Chen unlocked it with a master key and gestured for me to enter. Inside, the air smelled faintly of dust and old leather. I stepped in, and she handed me a second key. This one small, modern, and metallic, like something you'd find in a hotel room. It had no tag, no indication of what it belonged to. Everything your father left is inside. He wanted you to be the one to open it, Mrs. Chen repeated, her voice steady, as if there were no mystery or danger in the act. Take your time. I nodded again, feeling the weight of the moment settling on my shoulders as I approached the safety deposit box. The box was small, about the size of a shoebox, with a polished brass number 447 on the front. I slid the key into the lock, twisted it, and felt the familiar release. The contents inside were simple but strangely compelling. A thick envelope, a weathered leather journal, and a second key, like the one I'd just used, but with coordinates etched into the metal, coordinates I didn't recognize. I carefully placed everything on the small table in front of me, feeling the moment stretch into something bigger than I could fully understand. "Is there anything else I can help you with?" Mrs. Chen asked quietly, breaking my reverie. I shook my head, still holding the items in my hands as if they were fragile. "No, thank you." She gave me one last kind smile, then left the room, leaving me alone with the mystery my father had left behind. I stared down at the items in front of me, the journal especially drawing my attention. There was something about it that felt like it held answers, or at least clues. Something about the way the leather seemed to have aged with purpose, as if it had been waiting for me to find it. I picked up the journal, my fingers tracing the worn edges, before I opened it to the first page. The handwriting was unmistakable, my father's elegant script filling the pages, detailing something I hadn't known existed. And then, a sudden rush of realization hit me. My father's wealth wasn't what I had thought. The empire, the one my siblings would never know about, it was here, hidden away, a legacy that no one else had known about, and a secret that was mine alone to uncover. A strange mixture of pride and dread filled me, and as I closed the journal, I knew one thing for sure. There was much more to this than I could have imagined. The next step, whatever it was going to change everything. I sat at my kitchen table, the dim light from the overhead bulb casting long shadows across the room. The envelope that had been in the safety deposit box was now before me, its yellowed edges worn from years of being tucked away. I had opened it the moment I got home, my heart pounding with a mix of curiosity and disbelief. Inside, the leather-bound journal sat, thick and heavy, the kind of book that felt like it held a lifetime's worth of secrets. The modern key with the coordinates still lay beside it, and I couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than just some random treasure hunt. I ran my fingers over the cover, feeling the slight bumps of the worn leather beneath my touch. It smelled like old paper and tobacco, the kind of scent you'd expect from a place that had been untouched for years. With a deep breath, I opened the first page. The handwriting was my father's. There was no mistaking it. The sharp, precise letters filled the pages, chronicling investments, deals, properties, and financial maneuvers I'd never heard of. It was like a different man wrote this journal, the one my father kept hidden away from us. It wasn't the man I'd known who had always talked about his plans in vague terms, who'd avoided specifics and never bothered to share his true wealth with anyone. This was a record of something far larger, more complex than any of us realized. An empire. I flipped through the pages, each one more revealing than the last. Commercial real estate, luxury condos in downtown cities I'd never even visited, a collection of art, not the kind my siblings had inherited, but something far more valuable, and in the margins, notes in his handwriting, reminders about properties I had no idea he owned. Hidden investments, leases, acquisitions, and properties in his name that no one had ever mentioned. There was a mention of a trust fund, one that was set up long before I ever knew anything about my father's financial dealings. The more I read, the more I realized just how much my father had protected me from his world, the very world that my siblings had always dreamed of being a part of, but never truly understood. And then, at the very end of the journal, I found a letter. It was tucked into the back cover, folded neatly in half, like it had been waiting for me. I opened it slowly, afraid of what it might say, but the words my father wrote were direct, simple, and yet they hit me harder than any of the other revelations in the journal. Evelyn, it began. I'm sure you are wondering why I've left you with so much more than what you may have expected. The truth is, I knew I could never entrust my legacy to your brothers and sisters. They love the idea of wealth, but not the responsibility. They love the things money can buy, but not the work it takes to create something real. You were always the one who saw the heart of what I built, not just the surface. You loved me, not for what I could give you, but because you understood the value of what I had worked for. That's why I trust you to carry on my legacy. The words stung in the best way possible. I had always known that my father and I shared a bond that none of my siblings could understand. But reading these words, the responsibility, the legacy, the work, it all came together in that moment. This wasn't just about the money. It was about something deeper, a trust, a duty, a connection. The final lines of the letter were the most significant. You have everything you need to carry this forward, but you must not share this with them. They've already shown their greed, their desire for the wealth I've accumulated, but they've never once asked themselves why I built it in the first place. Keep this to yourself. Protect it. And when the time comes, use it to create something of your own, something that can help others the way I have helped you. I sat back in my chair, the journal resting on the table in front of me, the key still cold in my hand. I understood now I had been left everything, not just because I was his daughter, but because I was the only one who truly understood the weight of it all. The others, they wanted money, but they had no idea how to handle it. I was the one he trusted to carry it forward, to protect it, and perhaps to make something greater of it. My inheritance wasn't just about material wealth. It was about preserving something far more valuable, the foundation my father had built, and the promise that I could continue it in my own way. The weight of the responsibility settled on me, but strangely, it didn't feel like a burden. It felt like freedom. This was my chance, my opportunity to create something that truly mattered. I stood up, the journal and the key now feeling like part of me, not just some gift from my father, but a testament to his belief in me. And in that moment, I knew exactly what I had to do next. I walked into Brandon's house, the new renovation so elaborate that it barely felt like the same place I had visited years ago. The entire place gleamed with expensive furniture, fresh paint, and modern touches, each corner a display of his newfound wealth. It was all meant to impress, to signal success in every way. And the guests, mostly extended family and a few of his business contacts, seemed eager to feed off that energy. The chatter in the room was light and artificial, with my siblings taking the lead. I could see it in the way they moved, the way they spoke, Ashley with her newest business ventures, Brandon boasting about his sports cars, Marcus throwing out ideas for landscaping the backyard, where he had already started planning a mini golf course. They're just sitting there collecting dust, Brandon said, as though it were the most natural thing in the world, his hands flung out toward the driveway. I'm thinking about getting another one, maybe something more exotic, something I don't have yet. His voice was as smooth and polished as the cars he talked about, full of self-assurance, the same kind of arrogance that had seeped into his every word since the reading of the will. I knew exactly what he was doing. He was trying to show off, flaunt what he had. Not that it surprised me. It was what Brandon always did, Ashley chimed in, her voice light, airy, as though we were all sitting around at a cocktail party. I just signed a big deal for the company, she said, dabbing at her eyes with a designer handkerchief, the same one she had used at the funeral, as if she needed to prove to everyone how much she cared. She laughed, a little too loud. I know, it's so exciting. I've been working on this for months, and now it's all coming together. It feels like everything's falling into place. I stayed quietly sitting at the back, observing them from a distance. Their voices were a hum in the background as I sat, clutching the key in my pocket, trying to remain calm. The small rusted object felt heavier every time I thought about it. My father's last gift to me, a mystery that none of them would ever understand. They were all wrapped up in their material wealth, flaunting their success like it meant something. But I knew better now. I was different. My inheritance was not about the things they coveted. It was something deeper, something more valuable: freedom, knowledge, and most importantly, the empire my father had built quietly in the background, hidden from them all. They didn't understand it, they couldn't, and for the first time, I felt a strange sense of peace settle over me. While they prattled on about investments and renovations, I could feel the weight of the key pressing against my leg. My inheritance wasn't here, it wasn't in these lavish homes, and it wasn't in the money they had already begun to spend. It was something else entirely. I glanced at them, each one too busy enjoying their new luxuries, to notice the calm contentment I felt in the knowledge that I wasn't like them. I wasn't caught in the trap they had created for themselves, a cycle of consumption and accumulation. I wasn't a part of their game, and I didn't have to be. "Evelyn," Brandon said suddenly, interrupting my thoughts. I looked up at him, surprised that he had noticed my quiet. "You haven't said much. Everything okay?" I smiled politely, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm good, just taking it all in." Ashley gave me a pointed look, then tilted her head. "You know, you don't have to stay in that little apartment forever," she said sweetly. But I could see the undertone. It was the same one I had heard too many times before. "You should be grateful. Let us help you." "I'm happy where I am," I said firmly, my voice quiet but strong. The smile that flickered across her face didn't quite reach her eyes. She quickly shifted the conversation back to herself. "I think you're just being stubborn," she said lightly. "Anyway, we're all so busy with our projects. You should come by more often, you know? Maybe you'll find something to invest in too." The words stung, though I didn't let it show. She was so certain that she could buy her way to happiness, to success. The truth was, she could have it all, but it wouldn't fill the empty space inside. None of it would. The dinner continued, but my mind was elsewhere, floating far above the conversation. I thought about the journal, about my father's hidden empire, and how it would shape my future. There was so much more ahead of me than just this evening. The things my siblings flaunted were fleeting, and in the end, they would only know how hollow it all was. I wasn't bitter, I wasn't angry, I was simply content. I had found my true inheritance. It wasn't the millions, the properties, or the investments. It was the knowledge and responsibility that came with it, and that was more valuable than anything they could ever have. As they continued their boasts, I remained quiet, the key still pressing against my pocket. For the first time, I realized that I didn't need their approval. I didn't need to compete with them. I had something they could never take from me, the truth about my legacy, and that, more than anything, was priceless. The gallery buzzed with excitement, the walls adorned with my paintings, each piece reflecting my journey, my struggles, and my aspirations. This was it, my first solo exhibition, something I had dreamed of for years, but never imagined would feel so surreal. The room was filled with critics, art lovers, and a few familiar faces from my past. They stood in clusters, discussing the art with passion, their words sharp with praise. I could hear snippets of their conversations, admiring the brushwork, the depth, the emotion. I stood quietly at the back of the room, a small glass of wine in my hand, watching from a distance. The paintings were selling, every one of them. It was surreal, but not in the way I thought it would be. This wasn't the breakthrough moment that had eluded me all those years, because deep down I knew the true breakthrough was something far beyond the art itself. I looked over at the corner where the most expensive pieces were displayed. Each one had already been claimed, their new owners already identified with the simple, elegant red dots by their frames. A few of the buyers were important people in the art world, ones whose names were whispered in awe by those who considered themselves in the know. Then, like a storm brewing, I saw them, the ones I never imagined would show up. My siblings, Brandon, Ashley, and Marcus, arrived with all the pomp and flair they always carried. Brandon was dressed in a suit that probably cost more than my entire art supply budget for a year, his expensive watch glinting under the gallery lights. Ashley was next to him, smiling that perfect, controlled smile she always wore in public. The designer clothes, the well-groomed hair, it was all so carefully curated. They didn't see me at first, engrossed in their own world of networking, mingling with people whose names they recognized and could use to elevate their status. But when they finally caught sight of me, I noticed the way their faces shifted, more curious than surprised. Brandon, his voice too loud, too proud, approached me with a grin. Well, well, Evelyn, this is quite the turn of events. I see you're finally making a name for yourself. I smiled. Not because I felt joy at his words, but because I knew exactly where this conversation was going. He didn't care about my art. He didn't care about how much work I had put into this exhibition. He only cared about how he could exploit this moment for his benefit. Ashley joined in, flicking her hair back and leaning in a little too close. It's impressive, she said, eyeing a painting on the far wall. But you should really hire someone to help manage this. I'm sure you'd want to invest the proceeds wisely, right? Maybe diversify into something, well, more sustainable. I nodded, pretending to listen, but my mind was elsewhere. They were still wrapped up in their world of financial gain, trying to see my success through the lens of their materialistic perspective. They had no idea where my wealth came from. They didn't understand that this wasn't my success at all. It's really a family affair, isn't it? Marcus said, his voice dripping with mock enthusiasm. You've come a long way, Evelyn. But, you should think about your future. Art's great and all. But maybe you should look into some other investments. Real estate, perhaps. I felt the heat rise in my chest. They were all the same. They thought this was a game. They thought my success, the one that had come not from art sales, but from something much more substantial, was just another opportunity to flex their business-savvy muscles. I took a deep breath and set my glass of wine down on a nearby table. I turned to face them, my voice calm but firm. Actually, the true reason I'm here today, selling these paintings, is because of my father's investments, not because of anything I've done with this art. So, if you're looking for advice on how to invest wisely, maybe you should talk to me about those instead. The room went silent for a moment, and I could see the shock in their eyes. They weren't expecting that. They weren't expecting me to challenge them, to reveal that my financial success had nothing to do with what they were trying to take credit for. The awkward pause stretched on, before Brandon cleared his throat. Well, he started, recovering quickly. It's great that you're doing well. I just think there's so much more potential here. We could help you build this into something massive, Evelyn. I raised an eyebrow, my voice colder now. No, thank you. I've got everything I need. I didn't need their advice. I didn't need their help. I turned to look at the crowd, the buyers, the critics, people who were here for the art, not for the money or the status. That's where my true success was, and that's what mattered. Why don't you go enjoy the party, Brandon? I'm sure there's someone here who could help you with that potential you're always talking about. They didn't say much more after that. They didn't need to. They knew I wasn't interested in their games, in their attempts to control everything, and that was the moment I truly felt the shift. I wasn't just Evelyn, the artist, anymore. I was someone who had control of her future, someone who had far more than they could ever understand. My father had entrusted me with something much greater than art. It was an empire, one built on wisdom, not greed. As the night went on, I watched my siblings slowly retreat into their corner of the room, talking to people who could help them. I stayed at the back, content in the knowledge that I was building something of my own, and no one could take that away from me. I stood in front of the tall, imposing building that housed Mr. Whitman's office, the lawyer my father had trusted with everything. The marble facade reflected the bright morning light, and the cool breeze was a stark contrast to the heat in my chest. The key in my pocket felt heavier today, as if it had a life of its own, drawing me toward this final step. Inside, Mr. Whitman's office was sleek and minimalist. The polished wood desk sat in the center of the room, and the shelves were lined with books and legal papers. The air smelled faintly of leather and coffee, a familiar scent that brought back memories of my father sitting in a similar room, silently handling paperwork while I sat across from him. I never thought I'd be here alone, handling the future of everything he'd left behind. Mr. Whitman stood as I entered, his eyes kind but businesslike. "Evelyn," he said, his voice warm but with the gravity of the moment in his tone. "It's good to see you again. Shall we get started?" I nodded, my pulse quickening. "Yes, please." He gestured for me to sit across from him, and I did, placing the leather-bound journal and the envelope I had found in the safety deposit box onto the desk between us. The lawyer's eyes flicked briefly to the items before focusing back on me. "I've prepared the documents to finalize everything," he said, sliding a thick stack of papers toward me. "All that's required is your signature, Evelyn. This will transfer the ownership of the properties and businesses to you, as per your father's wishes. I looked down at the stack: deeds, titles, contracts for commercial properties and real estate, assets that had been hidden from everyone else, hidden from my siblings. As I glanced through the documents, it all began to sink in. My father had not just given me his legacy. He had given me a system, a complex web of investments, real estate, and businesses. Each paper represented a piece of the empire I now controlled. "It's a lot to take in," Mr. Whitman said softly, "but you're well within your rights to manage this however you see fit." I traced my finger over the first document, my thoughts swirling. I'd never been a part of this world before, the world of business and wealth. But now it was mine to navigate. The hidden empire my father had built was in my hands. "Do you have any questions?" he asked. As if sensing the uncertainty in me, I shook my head, though a small part of me wanted to scream. Questions, there were so many. But this wasn't the time for them. Instead, I turned my attention to the next part of the process. I had a plan now. I could see it clearly in my mind, something my father would have wanted me to do. I had already made my decision. I wasn't going to let this wealth change me, but I knew how I could use it for good, for something meaningful. "I want to create a foundation," I said, my voice firm as I looked Mr. Whitman in the eye. "A foundation to support struggling artists, like I once was, the ones with potential but no means to make it. I want to give back in a way that matters." Mr. Whitman smiled, a rare, genuine expression that made his eyes soften. "Your father would be proud," he said quietly. That's exactly the kind of legacy he would have wanted. My chest tightened, but I didn't allow myself to feel sentimental. Not here, not now. There was too much to do. This empire wasn't just about financial success. It was about using what I'd inherited for something more, for creating opportunities where there had been none. I picked up the pen and signed the papers. One by one, I made the decisions, carefully, deliberately, knowing that each signature would change my life forever. Once everything was signed, Mr. Whitman handed me a new set of documents, papers for the foundation. I took them, my fingers gripping the thick pages. My father's empire was officially mine to manage. But more than that, I now had the power to shape it into something that could help others. "That's it then," Mr. Whitman said, standing up and offering me a hand. "It's all yours now, Evelyn." I stood shaking his hand, the weight of the world still pressing on my shoulders, but in a way that felt manageable now. "Thank you, Mr. Whitman," I said, my voice steady. "I'll make sure this is worth it." As I left his office, the papers safely tucked under my arm, I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. I wasn't just Evelyn anymore, the quiet, art-focused sister who had never quite fit in. I was something new, something stronger, and for the first time in my life, I knew exactly what I was meant to do. I was going to build something that would last, not for me, but for others. Something that mattered, and nothing, not even the wealth my siblings had so brazenly flaunted, could change that. The gala was everything I had imagined it to be, and yet, nothing like I had imagined it at all. The room was elegant, the air thick with anticipation, as the attendees mingled around, enjoying cocktails and discussing art with fervor. It wasn't just an exhibition, it was a celebration of a new chapter in my life, one where my father's legacy and my own artistic passion collided. I had invited a select few to the event: art collectors, critics, and a handful of friends who had supported me throughout my journey. But amidst the clinking glasses and quiet conversations, there was an unmistakable presence that I couldn't ignore: my siblings. They arrived together as they always did, an inseparable trio. Brandon with his tailored suit and flashy smile, Ashley with her perfect hair and designer dress, and Marcus with his air of self-importance, as though he were the one to decide what everyone else should think of me. I could feel their eyes on me as they approached, drawn not by the art, but by the glamour of the event itself. "Well, well," Brandon said, a grin spreading across his face as he stepped forward. "Evelyn, look at this. The big art world, huh? I have to admit, I didn't think you had it in you," his voice carried across the room, and I could see people turning their heads to see what he meant. I could feel Ashley and Marcus's eyes on me, waiting for some kind of reaction, but I didn't give them the satisfaction. I've worked for this, I said calmly, my gaze steady. It wasn't handed to me. Brandon scoffed, but it was more out of habit than genuine insult. He wasn't listening. He never did. You should be careful, Evelyn. The art world isn't exactly forgiving. You need a solid plan, investments, something real to back it up. He glanced at Ashley, who chimed in with her usual overconfidence. Honestly, I've been thinking about your future, Ashley said, her voice smooth. With this kind of success, you could really expand. There's a lot of money to be made, you know. We could help you diversify, maybe look into some properties or other opportunities. You don't want to get stuck in the starving artist cliché, right? Her words were coated in sweetness, but I could hear the underlying tone. They didn't care about the art. They cared about controlling me. They thought they could capitalize on my success, just like they always had with other people's resources. I took a deep breath, my fingers tightening around the stem of my wine glass. The temptation to tell them exactly where my true wealth came from was almost unbearable, but I remained calm, my voice steady as I turned to face them fully. You're right, I don't want to be a starving artist, I said. But the reason I'm here, doing this, is not because of art sales or investments or business strategies. I paused for a moment, locking eyes with each of them. It's because of my father's legacy, the one he left me in secret, the one you'll never understand. The shift in the air was immediate. For a split second, I saw the smugness in their faces falter. They had always assumed that my success, whatever it was based on the art alone, the sales, the prestige. They had no idea that everything I had, everything I was building, came from something far more substantial than they could imagine. Brandon's grin faltered, and Marcus shifted uncomfortably on his feet, but Ashley, ever the strategist, quickly recovered. Evelyn, come on, she said, her voice almost pleading. You don't have to act so high and mighty. We're family. We want to help you, to make sure you're not making the same mistakes we did. I shook my head, cutting her off. I don't need your help. I'm not like you. I don't need to buy my way into success. My future doesn't rely on your advice or your connections. They all stood there for a moment, clearly stunned. They weren't used to being rejected, especially not by me. But I was done being their fallback plan, done letting them treat me like a safety net to catch them when they inevitably fell short. I turned my back on them and walked toward the crowd, where people were admiring my paintings. I could feel their eyes on me, but I didn't care. They didn't matter. This wasn't about them. It was about my art, my vision, my future. And no matter how hard they tried, they couldn't take that from me. As I moved through the room, I heard them talking quietly behind me, their voices strained, but I wasn't listening anymore. I had something much more important to focus on, my foundation, the one that would continue my father's legacy of helping those with talent but no means, the one that would give opportunities to artists who, like me, had struggled but had never given up. This was my moment, my time, and no matter how much they tried to rewrite the story, I would write my own. The foundation was just the beginning.